chance to be standing here and welcoming you to Sveriges Teamcoacher and our audience here in Sweden, letting them get to know more about you and your experiences and your breadth and depth of knowledge and experiences in team coaching. And then you to our audience who is really gaining momentum, passion, and interest in the field. And anyone who's here today had a chance to read about you. And so both you and I thought maybe it's even more interesting if I were to ask you just a few questions to get people to know things that they didn't read. And I'm hearing some voices in the audience, so perhaps you could mute yourself so that others will get a chance to hear. Thank you. So Carissa, what is most important to you right now? What's happening for you and your interests, and where is your passion bringing you right now?
I think right now, just firstly, a big thank you to all of you for the invitation, the opportunity, and for showing up here. I love working in Sweden. I've done that for many years, and Scandinavia in general, but I miss kind of the trips around there, especially at this time of year. But to your question, what's really showing up for me is how do you let life live through you? And what I mean by that is we live in this world with this incredible amount of change. The pandemic has really brought this question. It's like, how do I dance with life more? And how do I let and help my clients to do that too? To really be a co-creator with life. So how do I keep expanding myself in order to dynamically, I have a purpose, I have a vision, steer that, but also just let life come to me and also co-create and co-author with me what that journey is. And whatever practices I do just to become better at that. I think that's really what my intention is, and then how to bring that more and more into the work.
Okay, and that's really, it's interesting, I think, for many to hear, and what could be even more interesting if you could share some of your story that just highlights, that brings you to this interest and motivation of co-creation, so then we can understand how that connects to team coaching.
Sure, absolutely. And it really does, I think, connect to team coaching and just all coaching, but especially with teams. When I was small, I walked on the street. I happened to live in 4 or 5 countries by the age I was 12. What really came to me was that you passed people in the street who had a twinkle in their eye. There were some people, they looked like they kind of got it. They got the game. And there were other people that just looked very sort of like zombies or a bit dead. And I remember very early on identifying with, I want to be one of those people with the twinkle. And what is this thing called life? And when I think about work today, we know this, whether you're a team coach, an executive coach here working in an organizational HR capacity, I think we all know the statistics about the low level of engagement, the challenges that we have today with stress, with resilience, with anxiety. So how do you really be a great team? How do you build an organization that is team-centric, where there is great collaboration and connection? The only way I think you can do it is by helping to create more twinkles in the organization. How do you really help people to be fully alive while they're doing the work? And my journey has been that. It's been whether I was a private secretary to an ambassador, whether I was in sales and marketing, whether I was a broadcast journalist, whether I've been the last 21 years coaching, consulting. It's how do you really create the conditions for that quality of relationship and connection and presence that really gets to great results.
Yeah, could you say, why is team coaching then really important for your future as a vehicle to enable this to happen?
Yeah. Well, I'm only one person. And, how do I scale my impact? And there are a couple of ways. One is working in collaboration with people like yourselves. I'm on the faculty of 6 Team Conditions, so putting together a team of teams, creating a global community of team coaches, kind of a living dynamic relationship system of experts who can then go on and influence the other influencers inside organizations. And then there's directly working in organizations really to create competence, like team leaders really become great team coaches. And I think a lot of what I do is, teams exist to produce results, as we all know. It's about doing the work. And so for me, team coaching today is how do you really create learning teams as well, team coaching that allows each individual to grow as well as the team to grow, the organization to flourish. And I'll bring some of those stories. That's what I intend to do today, is to bring out like 4 stories around how I've done that and how I'm doing that today. And why, team coaching is so important to me as a vehicle for really creating a more inclusive, sustainable, equitable world where people who want to do good can really make that happen.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful segue, that you've already whet the appetite for the readiness of why we're actually here today and some of the stories that you have to share for others to gain insights. Would now be a good time, Carissa, for me to hand it over to you to go into?
Why don't you?
Super. Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to listening in, and for everyone else to enjoy.
Thank you so much.
Over to you.
Thank you. I just want to say to the audience, firstly, I'm quite informal in how I present. So what I hope to do is that we're going to have conversations and chats as we go. So I'm going to talk a little, I'll share a story, and then after each of the stories, maybe we can make some time for questions. But please do bring in your questions all the way through in the chat as you normally would do. And I want to caveat everything I say that I'm just one person who happens to have had a team coaching journey, and that I know that you've already heard from some real experts in the field who have spoken to and the 2 instruments that I'm going to refer to and how I work with them. So that's my first segue. And the slides are really there just to keep you interested, because if you just look at me, you might get very bored. So listen to me, but let's go. So my understanding is that in this audience, you may be all 3 of these kind of types of person. You may be in the middle there, an executive coach who just loves to dance with your executive coach clients, but now you're interested in really working with teams, or you've already started to work with teams and you're saying, which direction do I go into? What's the first, how do I get the next step? You may be on the right-hand side there, a team coach who's already very well just starting out on your team coaching journey, or you're somebody who's been a consultant, you've been working with teams and team developments for a long time, but now you've got this itch around how do I become a more effective team coach, the systemic team coach that Anders spoke to before. And then on the left there of my picture is like this idea that you are possibly an HR or an organizational development consultant, somebody who works inside an organization or with whole organizations and is kind of curious around how do you create a team-centric culture or a teaming culture, and how does team coaching play into that? So you may be across all 3 pictures, but I'm expecting, I've catered to that audience, and I please feel free if I've missed you out. If you're somebody completely different, I'd love to know, and I hope this is going to be relevant for you too. And Anders, you have permission just to blurt and stop me whenever you want. So I mentioned, I believe you've had Ruth Wagman, who is a close colleague of mine from the 16 conditions faculty, and some of you may be thinking, I'm interested in doing that team diagnostic survey and go down that route. And then there are others of you who heard John Sandel, and you know sadly his brother who passed away, who I was very close to, Phil Sandel, and the Team Coaching International, and thinking, maybe I go down that route of becoming a certified team performance coach. And yes, I've done both. And so just thinking about these are the 2 diagnostics that I'm going to base my stories around. And the reason why I did them, was that and I'll tell you my journey in a minute, but you may be in this place where you can't see the wood for the trees, right? You're just not sure here how to move forward. And you're looking to kind of get some more clarity or make a decision around, what's the process that's going to be good for me? Or if you were someone like me, I couldn't see the wood for my trees because of my journey started executive coaching chief executives who asked me to work with their teams, and I had no experience of doing that. I really needed to find a process and some structure. So my journey, just so you know, is kind of unexpected. I didn't anticipate to be here. Some of it, yes, but some of it just let, as I said, life flow through me. I started coaching in 2002, and because I started working with chief executives in the top team as a media trainer, media coach, they became my first executive coaching clients. And so I trained up in a variety of things, but one of them was becoming a coactive coach. Those same clients were asking me, as I said, to work with teams. And because I came from the coactive, the Coach Training Institute, then Teamcoaching International, where a lot of people had come from that place, was there. I trained up in that. I became a member of the faculty quite soon. And that was a wonderful opportunity to then feel like I had a little bit more structure to help me go out and work now with these top teams, which was pretty scary thing to do. And I had been already also training in ORSC, in organizational and relationship systems coaching, which I'm sure many of you based in Sweden will have heard of, a fabulous training, which really looks at relationship systems intelligence and definitely is a systemic approach to coaching, not just individuals, teams, but whole organizations, relationships in general. And I became faculty of that. And then it was only in 2018 when I realized, having worked with all these tools, I needed even more help to get the team performance, team effectiveness, more goal setting for me. And that's when I did the team diagnostic survey that is with 6 teams conditions. I met Carissa. Carissa and I hit it off, and there was an opportunity to take over the Teamcoaching Zone podcast. I wanted to get out there. I wanted to try something. Having been a broadcast journalist, I was interested. And then from that onto the faculty of the 16 conditions. And lots of exciting things coming from that, which will be shared in the future. But that's just to say, that's my journey so far in learning. And what I'd like to do is it's given me a global village of collaboration, which is what I said. How do I scale my impact? And really helped create this opportunity to work with systemic team coaches around the world. And it's that story now that I'm going to bring you. So these are, as we said, the 2 diagnostics, if you want, that you will have heard of in the past. I just want to tell you, I'm not going to do a compare and contrast. I'm not going to tell you the benefits of this and the benefits of that. What I want to do is to share with you 4 stories, as I said, of how I've used them, and maybe to help you think through which framework is one that might fit your client situation, or which one intuitively feels interesting for you.
Carissa, we have a question before we jump into your stories, and that is if you have any experience with the instrument from Leadership Circle, the collective leadership assessment and the leadership system.
Yes, thank you. It's a great question, and I really wanted to add that in, and then I decided that might just be too much, but I am qualified in the Leadership Circle profile, and I have actually used the collective leadership assessment far more than I've used even the Leadership Circle profile. Yes, and I do have a lot of experience with it, and I love it, and I'm more than happy to take questions on that too. And if you listen to me and you heard me talking about let life live through you, and you understand that I'm passionate about adult development, you would know why that particular tool and instrument is really compelling for me. Yes, so the answer is yes, and more than happy to share that experience too.
Thank you.
So my first story is about how I use the team diagnostic assessment. So this is a client that goes quite far back. And this is, let's just say, a more traditional way of how you might use this instrument. And why did I use it? So it's a management team, happened to be an all-women management team. I'd been called in by the board, and I'd worked once with the board, and there was a sense of stuck. This team is stuck. It's not delivering. It was a new CEO for the first time. It was a charity, a not-for-profit healthcare provider, but to the UK Health Service. And it was really to start to help this team to become better performance, increase its effectiveness. And so I'm going to start with the results. This is where I use this over a classic period of 6 months. And what you see on the left is the picture of the before and after. So the cutout line is that team's self-assessment of their own performance as a team when we started. And then the more solid white space is where they got to at the end of 6 months. And as you'll see, this is really a story about trust. Building trust in themselves as a team, as a leadership team, in each other, being able to be their own decision making, having their own authority as a team. And this model, if you recall, for those who are not familiar with it, it introduces these 2 dimensions of positivity, which is really about the emotional bonds and relationship, and productivity, which is really about the kind of tasks that need to be done to become an effective team. And what the model introduces is the idea that you need to increase positivity to increase positivity. And so what we see here in the 6 months is this team managed to harness those positivity factors to become a true leadership team. And as a result of it, they completely restructured their organization to actually be able to deliver on the 5-year strategy which had been agreed with the board. And there's a lot more story to that is essentially where I use this tool. What is beautiful about this tool is in that first conversation, what we were able to do, you see that picture, this polar diagram is this, it's, if you want that blue, gray, purple, whatever color it looks like on the right there, that web is how that team is leading every day, how they are managing and leading their organization. And it immediately puts up a shape for conversation. And it finds where is the edge that this team needs to grow in. And I think you can see the dip in trust, but we start to have a conversation around that. And already by the end of the session, this team had identified that to really help grow the whole system, they needed to harness trust. So this was a journey into trust. And you go deeper diving into this diagnostic. And again, immediately we get to the issue. It starts at the interpersonal level, that they didn't trust each other to be vulnerable with their authentic voice. And what actually happened in this story is that was one person who was very strong, and they just were not aligned on their vision. They were not aligned on the direction of the organization. And they were not saying that, they were not speaking up. It was rather leading to more toxic communication styles. But again, this kind of, what you're seeing here is from this diagnostic, the 5 questions where we know there's the highest level of positivity and the lowest level of positivity. So if we're going to really harness and increase positivity to increase productivity, we need to explore this. And so it just means that the conversation that was in their heads gets out into the table. And then you go even deeper. And in some teams, I never share this picture because it really does now reveal at the individual level, although we don't know on the bottom axis there, you see there were 7 people in this team. Teamcoaching International will tell you that they shift they don't actually. That person, number 5, whoever number 5 was, you can see has a very different version of reality on most of those questions than the others, to some degree. But what that does allow us to see is where is the diversity of thought, the diversity of opinion around 5 critical questions here. And this, again, allowed us to identify very quickly where does trust need to be built and what is undermining trust. So you get to go in that first session very deep. And then even deeper, you can create these 5 questions. And I had asked this question, I love this question, what is this team tolerating? And in terms of behaviors, and you can already see they're telling you the whole story. So if they have not already had the conversation just with one graphic, by the time you've got them reading through quietly those questions in pairs or on their own and then in pairs, you have what needs to be talked about. So in terms of getting underneath and surfacing what's really getting in the way, this is a very valuable tool when it comes to relationships and, as I said, this kind of trust. And there are other tools. You may say, what did I share? Well, obviously, in this way, when you work, I'm sure John would have told you, when you do that sort of training of the Team Coaching International training, you get a whole load of tools. The same with the 6 team conditions. Both have great libraries, great resources. And then here are just some of the other tools that I used. The team visioning exercise is which I'm sure many of you do, visioning exercises, but we did it in such a way that we could really then say, well, what are the strengths that we really need to have? And that's where this trust thing came up. And from there, set goals from that place. There's always a lot of education around team toxins, to the Gottman's 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And please, I'm making assumptions as I'm saying these things, and please feel free to ask me, but that's really the kind of communication that shows up that decreases positivity, increases negativity, and makes it hard for the team to really hear each other and collaborate and work together. But I think what's really, this tool is very helpful for creating this psychologically spacious conversation, as I said, and revealing the system, which is what you want to do, and to really be able to see with no judgment, with curiosity, with compassion, just to hold the team and let's just talk about what's here. So that is the end of my first story. And before I bounce on, I just want to see, are there any questions, Anders, about that story? Any questions that people have? I see little signposts, or does anybody want to ask a question?
There was only a question about toxicity, but I think you answered that one at the end here with the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
Yeah. So how, so really with that, there was a bit of education, and you do learn to do that exercise as part of the training for the team diagnostic assessment, how to really work with what they call team toxins, which are based on John Gottman's work with the 4 different behavioral styles, communication styles, that can really bring a relationship to an end. And the research that's been done, that we need to really handle. You need to have a kind of 0 tolerance protocol, if you want, or policy, to make sure that you keep, a psychologically spacious conversation can't have blame, defensiveness, contempt, when people stop talking. And in this case, one woman had really just stopped. She just completely closed down. So it was only when we started to get that conversation really onto the table, which we understood now why the issue was just a very, very, really didn't believe in the vision, and therefore chose to leave that team eventually. At the end of the intervention.
Did the need for this come up when you were talking about the vision, or was that something you picked up from the measurement in the TDA?
Well, obviously it came out in the TDA. That if we go back, I didn't actually show you that, but in the TDA, I think there may have been a picture there. Can I go back? Oops, can I go back? Yes. In this TDA, if we look at what the TDA is showing, constructive interaction is really, so you see there's sort of a correlation between constructive interaction, decision making. I'm not sure if you can see my little cursor here, but on the right, yeah. So the constructive interaction is the ability to work positively with conflict. And so again, what's this thing around trust and constructive interaction? What is not being said here? What tools do they have? And then you see here we don't constructively provide each other with feedback. We don't know how to really speak our truth. We don't have any agreements of what to do with conflict. It's revealed there. And so now we can have a conversation around it. So even before the training, we get there. Yes. Then I just help them develop the toolkit so that they could deal with it. So that is a very traditional, I would say, obvious way of working with that assessment, which I really enjoyed and worked with it many, many times. I'm going to share with you another story around how I use it in a more consultative approach for a whole organizational department of 7 teams. But here is the second story, now introducing the team diagnostic survey, which is with the 6 team conditions framework. And this is short and sweet, and I'm presenting it with a little smile on my face. This is a client of mine in Switzerland. They're really smart, wonderful people. They're very friendly, and 2 founders, a team of 4. Really an IT consulting, data analysis is like core what they do. And I'd worked with them already by the time I'd introduced this for a couple of years in a number of different ways. And they really had this challenge to grow the number of consultants. They had been very conscious about creating a culture where they could have, attract PhD, high caliber thinking, but they still were struggling. And the way that they were organized as this management team, there was something you'll see here, which they couldn't hear the messages from the board or consultants or me. There was something that was a blind spot. And so eventually I said, look, why don't you do this team diagnostic survey? It just might reveal something of interest to you. And so what it revealed, and this is, this is the team diagnostic survey, and you will recall that what we're talking about, the 6 essential, these are the 6 team conditions, if you want, that will ultimately lead to great team effectiveness. And the idea is that, like, you have the sun, the soil, the water, what is it that you need to grow, need to be structurally in place? And what Ruth Wagman would say is that the research shows like 80% of a team's effectiveness comes from getting that structure, that design in place right at the beginning. And so you see that they go, hey, we're pretty good here. We're all green, we're all ready to go. But they were great people, but not necessarily a great team, because although there's all that green there and there's some work to be done on their compelling purpose, and there was a clash around vision, the effectiveness was not good, right? They were not being able to really manage and grow this organization. So what this result does is, yes, we could see that the compelling purpose wasn't challenging for all 4 of them. So what I want to say about this diagnostic and how I worked with this team is, actually I got sick. I was ill. So I had to take a break. So they did the diagnostic, and I decided, because they were consultants, because I knew them, that I would just share with the team lead, like the kind of the managing partner. I would send it, and without me going in and having that session with them. So by the time I had the session with them, they'd already looked at it. They'd already made the decision that this wasn't really that useful. It didn't really teach us anything. And yet they fundamentally changed the way they worked as a result of it. So you might think compelling purpose was the real issue. They needed to do some work. But actually the real issue was this, that what it started to do was see that, they really believed fundamentally in letting each person live. But if you're working as a team, managing and growing a business, that doesn't really work. You need something more. So there was the idea here that 3, one person didn't answer this question, but 3 of the 4 people thought that if we just keep going like this, it's all going to just implode. It's just not going to work. And this was a very helpful thing. They described themselves in the diagnostic as a self-governing team. In other words, we're all setting the overall direction. We're all deciding who does what. We're all managing the processes. We're all doing all of it. But the truth, that wasn't what was really happening in reality. And so what this diagnostic did was force them to address the very issue that was the hardest for them as a group of friends who, didn't want to upset anybody, that actually not everybody was equal. Not everybody had the same skill to go out and win new work as a consultant. Not everybody knew how to lead people. They had very diverse strengths, and that they needed to reorganize and work out how to collaborate in a different way. And what they end up doing, what they saw again in the diagnostic is they're not working together effectively to solve problems, and that they knew, that they didn't have a clear vision, and they didn't have a collaborative setup that could play to the strengths of the whole team. And so, as I mentioned, I wasn't even in there before they saw this, and somehow they managed to work out they needed to take action. And so this was like a catalyst. So they changed the structure of the management team. Before they had the idea that everybody's running equally in an equal lane, they changed that. They changed the compensation system around each of their positions. They revamped the growth board to make sure that they had the access to the resources that they needed, the supportive context to help them grow. And in the past 2 years, they've almost doubled in size now. I said 40 to 70 people. So that's a very short example of where I did very little team coaching, but I did come in and, I kind of knew that they needed to see something that they were not hearing. And I knew that they had the intelligence to have a conversation. Then, afterwards I helped them kind of, once they were in that new position, just bed it down. But they'd already seen it for themselves using this diagnostic. So just any questions around that?
Isn't it interesting that they said that it wasn't any news in there and it didn't help very much, and yet they changed so much?
Yeah, exactly. So I have to say that my experience, I recently used this diagnostic with an 18-person leadership team of a big public company, a big global company, you would know the name. And they had the similar response. It's like, I'm not sure what new this is giving to us. I think when people think about team coaching, sometimes there's an expectation that it's all going to be about the relationship, a bit like the team diagnostic shows you trust and conflict. And
right.
Actually what this does is to say, are you in shape? Have you got the tent set up properly so that when it gets really windy out there, you can all stay safe and strong and healthy?
Like a health check.
Yeah. And so there's a certain perceived, I don't want to say arrogance, but there's a perception like, well, of course we've got those things in place. But when they started to really look a little, examine and sort of talk about it, they realize they don't. Or the way they've set it up is not going to really, truly help them. They needed to know that that's the guy who originally had the idea, the man who is the CEO of the company, the man who is now the chairman because he didn't want to manage people, or he's not the chairman, he's like a strategic person. They all got different roles, and they all now play very different roles, but they are together a management team that talks about the whole. So they work truly systemically now as one living dynamic system, whereas in the past they thought of themselves like that, but that's not actually what was on paper, what really happened day to day.
The difference between talking about themselves as a team and being a team.
Exactly. Yeah. So they were a team in name only, really. And then they really learned to structure themselves with play to their diversity of strengths. They had the right people, but they hadn't configured it in the right way to really truly unlock the power of their collaboration.
Right.
Are we good to go?
We're good to go. Thank you.
So this next one is this is a company I worked with. This is probably from 2015, like 5-6 years ago. And I'd work with the leadership team, the executive board, for several years. I'd coached individuals. I had an ongoing relationship with them. So I was team coaching, if you want, the executive board. And they came to me one day, the CEO said, there's something wrong. There is something wrong in IT. We have this, our backbone of our business is technology and IT. It's a growing department. It's now made up of 7 teams. And there is something that's going wrong. Customers are unhappy. I don't know what's going on, but can you help us? So I said, yes, I can use this. Let's use this assessment. Let's start with a diagnostic. And so I introduced the team diagnostic assessment, the idea that each team did their own one. Each team leader would do their own. And there was also kind of an overarching head of IT, if you want. So there are more team leader views than teams. And I got the CEO to do his team leader view of the IT department. And then there were team 360s. Each customer of each of these 5 teams, also not all 7 teams, but 5 of them did their 360 based on how they worked. So we had all this information coming in to get a sense of what's really going on here, but to try and find a common language or a way of start to talking, but really for me to be able to go in and have some material to have conversations on the table at these different levels of this organization. And the truth is, this is how I kind of worked it. The first was I explained to the executive team, what are they going to see? How's this going to work? I got them to really, as you will do, to walk the model, to really embody and understand intuitively why this might be a useful approach. What is it going to reveal for us? The executive team, we had got permission from each team. The executive team gets all the reports first. I debriefed with every team leader. I then debriefed for two hours with each team, or maybe 2.5 hours with each team, and really what is really going on here. And as a result of that, it became quite clear what was happening. So that led to a series of workshops with they completely reorganized from 7 teams to 2 teams, a massive restructuring. But in the process of doing that, they appointed a couple of guys who I work with to co-design workshops that would work with the entire system. So everybody in the whole, forget about any teams, we're all working together now, we're mixing each other, and we are collectively looking at what is this system, and trying to get input to what shape should it be. They also recognized they did not have the leadership competence to run this kind of complexity in IT, and they hired a CTO, which made a massive difference. So I was helping him, supporting that transition. That's actually the work. And then I coached various teams as a result of that, and coached team leaders as part of that, in being able to really unlock these kind of conversations.
What you were working with here was a lot of the structure around the team, or the teams, and they were working together. My personal opinion is that you get much more support for that in the 6 conditions measurement than in the TCI model.
Okay, so this was before I had done the team diagnostic survey. So I would agree that you could use that, but what you had here, and maybe I'll go to another slide. What this helped us to see was, first of all, the difference in perceived performance, self-perception performance, and also customer satisfaction for each team. And it also then revealed the different competence level, if you want, of team leadership, right? So where was a team able to really work the different styles of leadership, the different ways of working that were just within this one IT department. So yes, the team diagnostic survey definitely looks more at strategies and the way of the work, but what the original complaint had been a behavioral complaint about IT. It had really been about the kind of communication styles particularly, and again this kind of negativity. Now again, if we go back to the team diagnostic survey, and Ruth would say, well, all of that, most of that will go away once you have the structure in place. But and yes, but they didn't even know where to begin. So what this allowed us to do in a way was to really have conversations across this whole department, intra-team. And so we by creating, designing a program afterwards, which got people to break down the silos, break down, there was tremendous silo thinking. So this sort of destructuring of the department through conversations without actually touching the work yet. It was very, very sensitive. So rather building the connection, and I really do believe in relationship before task, and that relationship is the driver of change. So I wanted to come at it from that angle, where we really, how do we build stronger relationships, better bonds across the 7 teams, until you have the leadership competence in place to then design the right structure. Because the people, what became clear is that the people in the department didn't have the level of sophistication to design what was needed for this fast-growing organization. Does that kind of answer your question?
It does. Thank you. Do you want to sort of finalize this? And I have a few more questions.
Yeah, yeah. If there are questions around this one, absolutely. Let's go. So you could imagine there were 7. So when I presented it, sorry, I thought I had a slide. I had all the 7 teams. They could see the different shapes. It was a big map of data. But really what I then tried to simplify it into a few themes to have the conversation, for the executive team to make decision around what do they want to do, you know. But go and ask more questions around this one, and then I'll turn to my
we have a question about the time frame here from Peter.
Yeah. And I'm very happy if anybody has a direct question, they can ask me, but maybe later. But the time frame for this was the actual, we did the assessments and the diagnostics very fast, within a few months. And then the actual, it was probably over a year that from when I then left off with the new CTO in place, having already these 2 teams already having been set up. So the CTO was already working as a consultant. There were 2, so I coached, there was a team of 3 people. So it was the 2 leaders and ultimately of the 2 teams and the COO. So I helped to integrate the IT with the rest of the organization. That was another big part of it, you know, that there was too much siloing. So everything to create these streams of connectedness across the department, but also between the department and the organization to increase the flow of information. So I'd say overall, by the time I was actually coaching, so the team coaching happened over a period of 6 months, 5 months, 6 months. So the whole thing I'd say was probably a year.
All right. I have a long question from Thomas. Would you like to ask the question yourself, Thomas? Thomas Attebom.
Yes. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Thomas.
And thanks for this. And I really liked how you entered this conversation with a twinkle in the eyes. That's something that resonated with me. So I had a question. I'm curious to hear, like when you go into an engagement and you shared 3 different stories, how do you go about deciding which coaching approach that you use? You have so many tools in your toolbox. And what are some of the criteria that you might help guide you in making a decision that you think will be bringing the most value for the client?
Such a delicious question. Thank you. You know, I often want to say, just taste them all, and then we're like, we'll take a bit from everything. And some clients absolutely are obsessed with learning and inspecting and looking in the mirror, and they love to do that, not maybe all the same time. I really try to understand what is the biggest challenge that they have as an organization, you know, at a strategic level. What is the strategic objectives, and then this team, and how does this team play in? And also to see, you know, if this is a new team, so then that team diagnostic survey is really useful. Or if it's a team that is straining a little bit and I sense that although they say they have all those 6 conditions in place, I think it's useful just to go back and test that, and then just rely on my own systemic team coaching skill set to facilitate the conversation, and we go from there. If I think, I mean, the collective leadership assessment culture, my passion now is really helping people to learn and grow as humans in order to become better, more effective teams, but also just much more for organizations to be a bigger player in creating the world that I think so many of us want to see. So the collective leadership assessment really addresses beliefs and assumptions, has that adult development piece in there as well as the leadership effectiveness piece. So if I really think it's an organization that has the capacity to, and genuinely wants to change, and is willing to do that sort of transformative work, I'll introduce the cultural leadership assessment. And if I feel it's like a team that we need to have the conversation, we need something to get the conversation going. It's something more about the relationship. Maybe we end up having to come to structure and they need to restructure themselves. I can still introduce the 16 conditions framework. I will always use that without using the team diagnostic survey. So then sometimes that team diagnostic assessment is just a really helpful way of getting people to start talking about, so what does trust look like in this team? And so who does make decisions around here? Or how are decisions made around here? Or how would you describe your communication? Yeah. So it's just a much lighter way of going in and bringing your curiosity around the system itself. Does that help, Thomas?
Yes, it does. And thank you for painting that picture. It's sometimes easy to forget the teams and the people when you just look at this charts and the numbers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So what I love here, and what I didn't mention in the first piece, is I don't know who uses constellations here, but I often, I haven't done it. I can do it now on a mural or on a Miro or, a whiteboard, but in person, it's so lovely to take big tape and put it on the floor. I'm sure many of you have done that, and create the spaces and the constellation for teams to really step in and say, hey, give me a gesture for respect here, and if we put in the middle, we put a problem like trust, so how can this help us have more, or becoming a leadership team? How can this inform? So you can really do a lot more presence-based team coaching. You can get people to embody with constellations, and that's another lovely tool. This lends itself to that. Of course, it does too with the team diagnostic survey. You get people to stand on different parts of the different triangles, and where do they think is a strength, where do they think is a weakness, and again, it's all about having the conversation.
Great, super. Thank you, Carissa. Do we have time for 2 more questions before
we do. We do. The last story is the one that I'm currently involved with, which I'm passionate about, and it's very live, but I'm very happy to take questions too. So let's do the questions. Yeah.
Because Staffan Åkerblom had a related question to the one Thomas was asking.
Go for it.
Staffan, would you like to?
I'm changing the picture just to keep people excited. Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe I'll change it to this.
Put the attention away from me. That's great. So I love it. Really builds on what you were just talking with Thomas about, which is, and so my starting point here is that I'm not certified in the 6 conditions or the TDA. I am in leadership circle and other team-related tools. Yeah. But my observation is that the tools that you've been mentioned are very comprehensive. Mm. And sometimes with clients, I note that they tend to get lost in too much data. Yeah. Because really, I really agree with you that what you want to do is to get them to talk about pressing issues that they're currently not talking about. Yeah. And they can get the conversations going. So, and constellation could be great for that. But then in your experience, what would be sort of the minimum, let's call it dimensions or aspects of a team that you would not want to miss to address, or maybe even measure? So leaving those instruments aside, where would you what aspects would you look for, at least to gauge both the sort of the some kind of average, but also the spread, which is very important when talking to a team?
Oh, it's such a good question. So let me try and do it some justice. So if I think about a team, firstly, I think it is a living entity and it has boundaries. So the first sense of it is like, what does the boundaries look like here? You know, how permeable is this team? What does membership look like? Do they know who's on the team? So that sense of like, what are we talking about here as an entity? That would be my starting point. Then it's connectedness to the rest of the system. Like, so, okay, so where are the doors, or where are the bridges, where are the tunnels that's not hidden, but how does that thing move? Yeah. And so, and what is the relationship like there? And some sort of temperature check, to get a sense of where is it hot and where is it cold and where is it blind spots. Yeah. I would want to understand something about the level of what leadership looks like in this team, what is desired, what is reality. And when I talk about leadership, I'm really thinking about vision, people management, and purpose, obviously, and tasks, like who decides around here what is the work of this team, and how do those decisions get made. I think those are some very basic ones. And then I would like, what is the output? Like, what does success look like? Who's expecting it?
Yeah.
What is the past? What's the track record? How, and culture just generally, again, what is feeding in, what is important around here, what is taboo around here. I think then the other thing around, team, always like, where is the stuckness? Just, where is it flowing? Where is it stuck? And trying to get a sense of, and their meaning making around that. So now I think about how conscious is this team in being a team? How conscious are the individual members in their own leadership, their own contribution? How much co-responsibility? How much co-accountability? And, if we think about, of course, Lencioni and everything, of course, trust, the idea of trust, and then having the conflict. Where is the creative tension? What are the assumptions around the creative tension? Where is the capacity for embracing diversity and multiple perspective? And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those are some of the basics that I would, fundamentals maybe, that I would address with whomever. I'm sure there are other things I've missed out. But, that would be a starting place. What would you add, Stappen? What would you add in?
Well, to add to your list, and when you say leadership and how it's co-created, I'm also thinking, I'm using the word membership. So just so membership, usually it's the growth of or the development of the membership that and sort of the more formal leadership will follow from that. And then in the end, we can't really distinguish. Everyone is a leader and everyone is a member, so to speak. But also to the different dimensions that you brought up, I would probably also something about the structure, right? So how often do they meet? What are the different arenas where they can have conversations? Because usually, at least if it's a management team, they will have many different, what I call clock frequencies, some issues that goes almost daily or at least weekly, and then some others that may be quarterly. And they, if they try to have one arena for all those different issues, it typically loses effectiveness. So that's another area that I would also gauge. How is that working for them? And more often than not, they have inherited structures, or they have structures that are, alike all across the organization, and never really thought through, do they work for us? Yes. So it's just more by habit or tradition or something like that. Well, so we have a management team meeting. It's every second week, 2 hours. Could it be anywhere else?
Yeah. Stefan, there's one other thing as you're talking, because absolutely I agree with that, and lots of bells going off. I've done a lot of work with private equity, and you mentioned analytical. I did use this with a whole kind of different businesses within one partnership of private equity. It's really fun to build collaboration and partnership. But the compensation model is another thing I would go to in certain cultures. It's like, how are you being compensated to work together versus hunt and kill for yourself? So that would probably be something I'd have certainly in the back of my mind.
Absolutely. I just work in a bank, so I know precisely. But
Yes.
it's like, don't mention the war. I did it once. I think I got away with it. As Reciprocity would say. Okay, thank you very much. I'll withdraw.
Great.
Brilliant. Carissa, can we do one more question before we move on?
Yes, go for it.
Melanie had a question that she'd like to ask.
Thanks. Thank you. It's a follow-up to the comment that you made of the work you were doing with the TDS and the management team of 18 people. And I don't know whether this is more a diagnostic aspect of the question or of the size of the team and your opinion about what makes an effective team and the right size. And I recognize, being recently certified in the TDS, that Ruth has a perspective on that, and yet you sounded like when you talked about the management team you were working with, that they became quite effective. So I'm wondering what your thought and opinion is about that size between 18 to 20 members, and what you might diagnose or ask about that and work with.
Thank you, Melanie. Just to clarify, the example I provided you of that management team was for 4 people. The ones who got smart and worked it out and changed their structure, that was just a management team of 4. I was
then you mentioned something else.
And actually that team, I worked with Ruth. So I brought Ruth in to work with my client. And that was a team of 18 people. And to your point, that's way too big. And the chief executive has reduced the number, the CEO has reduced the number of people, but still, I think it's like 15. It's way too big. It's because of the nature of the organization. So in terms of our ability to coach that team, it actually catalyzed, again, I think a lot of the TDS provides proof points to an organization that they need to restructure. They are already looking, in this case, it's a transformation, a real transformational, organizational transformation. And all it did is just point more to 2 things. One, the compelling purpose, that if they were really going to stick together and work as a team, and at least have this forum where there are 18 of them, there needs to be a shared compelling purpose, a reason for that team to exist. Then that they would find ways of collaborating, and they needed to trust each other to create smaller working groups, let's say the functional elements versus the business, the general managers, the real business owners of different businesses. So they kind of needed to work in 2 different sub-teams, if you want. So they started to create a culture around that. Again, going back to changing the meeting agenda, I think the TDS is extremely helpful. It almost like being more of a coach consultant and helping them to have conversations and get clarity around the setup, the structure. The emergent coaching with that team never emerged. We really just did the structural coaching. So it's a much shorter intervention over just a few periods of months. We'd spoken to each individual leader. And, you know, it was also clear that with a conversation like that, there's also the global influence that needs to come in. So you have actually, the best we can do is to really help them have the most accurate conversation when they're looking in the mirror around their own structure, and to get real around what's possible, rather than take them through on a long journey to actually support that restructuring, because they have their own internal resources. I don't know if that answers your question, but I certainly think that's way too big a team to coach. I think the biggest team, I think for that type of team, 8 people, 9 people maximum is where I've seen. 4 people is obviously a very good sized team for management teams, but yeah, that is really think of themselves maybe more as, they needed to get that compelling purpose, as I said, for them to really think of themselves as a team as opposed to a working group. The reality is they needed to build trust in these 2 other forums to get the work done.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Okay. can I present my last case? And then I'm very
Please do.
happy to ask all the, I don't want to run out of time with. So this is using the 6 teams conditions framework, TDSs. It's a company I've worked with for 10, 11 years. When I met them, they were just under 100 people. They're now 350 people. They're pan-European. They're in technology. And they are, the CEO is passionate about creating an organization which is human-centric, deeply human organization. And they are, it's all, one team is one of their values. So they're very team-centric too. And what he wanted to do was to build, they've got very young people, they've got people that have been there for a long time, and they've got a relatively more seasoned leadership team that has been very stable. And the leadership team is recognizing that they'll be moving on. And so he wanted to create a culture, a staircase for leadership, and a collective leadership culture with much more connectedness and collaboration. And so I introduced this idea of something called, which became and is Flourish and Prosper. It's a program now that has been going, we launched November 10, 2019 was the launch, but there'd been a huge amount of diagnostic and assessment up to that. So it's been going since then, and you'll see it continues to go. But he wanted this idea of how do you help people to live an examined life? And I go back to the beginning of my story about wanting to create more twinkles in the world, helping people to let life live through you. How do you really help build that resilience, that well-being, that healthy organization, healthy team, healthy individual, and really trust and work with life as a partner? So that was the philosophy. And after we'd done all the diagnostic, we did a 2-day launch. And I'll tell you who was in this launch. So I had worked with them before, and I knew that the danger was that you build a learning community and then there's the rest of the organization. So I wanted the leadership team to be involved. We decided it would be self-selected. So people were 75 people applied. 42 people got onto the main program. We came up with criteria. The leadership team decided. That you see that one facilitator there, that's me, just giving you a size of this system. Then they decided that some of those people that applied were not quite at that level of leadership, or the level of responsibility. They were younger. So they created this thing called the foundation for 16 people there. I think it was actually 19, it was 16. And then I said, okay, we need to have these support mentors who can be bridges, who can be weather reporters, who can pick up and bridge with the rest of the organization, make sure that we don't just kind of fly off like a satellite, but also can be there to support the foundation participants, can be there to support the main program participants. And that I would be working with the leadership team, with the support mentors to create and hold this space. And this really is about becoming kind of a developmental organization for Stefan and others with who like Keegan's work, adult development, but also unlock the power of collaboration and play to their strengths. And it had, a leadership development element in it, a launch, these 4 different modules, leading self, leading others, leading teams, leadership communications, culture, and each of these would have been a 2-day program with webinars, and then also becoming learning teams. So the whole idea of becoming learning teams. What happened, of course, is just after we launched, just after the first module, COVID, the pandemic, and I had to do the whole thing online, but I will leave that side of the story out. For the purposes here, during this 2-day launch, the purpose was to create this conscious and intentional community, but it was taking all those people there, including the 42 people that were in the room, especially, and designing learning teams of 7. where each person would have a member of the leadership team minus the CEO as one of their mentors. And I'll explain how that happened. But this is something I learned on the tool ship with Gabe Abella. Some of you have may seen him. He's a wonderful agile coach. He's an organizational coach. He works for JP Morgan. We're great buddies. And he taught me how to do rapid team formation. Using the 6 team conditions was in my mind, but this was an exercise to get everybody to identify what were the criteria to be a great learning team. And as a result of that, what we ended up with was 6 learning teams with 7 people. They'd been organized by these skill sets. You have multiple rounds until they kind of get it right. We then did an exercise, get the team name. They got their compelling purpose, an agreement around how they're going to work together, and that they would have to deliver real projects to create value in the team. But this was kind of the launch. During the launch, so some of the tools I used from the team diagnostic survey, again, coming back to purpose, well, let's start with your story of self and why are you in that room? Why did you sign up for this thing? But before the members did it, the participants, I got each leadership team member to do their story about their lessons. And each one was talking around a growth edge of theirs. And based on that story, the learning teams had already been created. They chose which one of the leadership team members that they wanted as their mentor. Now, just on the story, it was also how they know them. And the team members share their stories, they come up with this team purpose, and then that whole community came up with a compelling purpose and one big thing that this program was going to deliver. And again, I want to tell you the spirit was experimental. It's let's experiment. And having worked with them for more than 10 years, I had the trust of the leadership team. And, I was curious to experiment and to see, are these 6 teams going to become a team of teams and work on that one big thing together? Or are they going to work in silos, which would be kind of the norm? We didn't say you have to pick a team leader. Are they going to learn to do shared leadership and be self-directed? Are they going to choose a team leader or not? Are they going to be self-directed in terms of really supporting each individual to grow? Each person had done a lot of diagnostics on their own. They all had their own, they'd written a personal essay. Each person had their own personal learning goal. The primary aim of the learning teams was to support each individual to grow. And then as a learning team also to become a project team to deliver value to the organization. So it had sort of dual purpose, but a learning team at its core. So I was curious, are they going to really get into this? I was going to teach them peer coaching skills. What is going to happen? Are they going to stay focused on helping each person? Or as soon as they get a project, which I anticipated they might do, are they going to divert and just focus on doing the top project and getting on with the task? And then what lessons would they be applying from the training as they go through the year? And as part of, learning, so I introduced the 6 team conditions framework as the methodology to understand about team effectiveness. And so for each person on the program, some people were team leaders, other people are not. Some people managed many teams, but it was to get them to think through their own teams, but also, of course, help them become a more effective now from being just a learning team. Are we set up straight? Now we really have to be a project team. We have a compelling purpose. We need to get a compelling goal and we need to deliver something. And as you would imagine, and I anticipated this, that compelling purpose after the first few months would not be so clear for them because they weren't sure yet what they were going to do beyond just helping each other learn. That would really require them to work together as one system to deliver something. And so this diagnostic, of course, reintroducing it for the second time, not only learning the framework, but using the diagnostic to help them to get into better shape and become more effective project teams. And and always with this willingness to see they may just crash. And if they crash, that's great. They're going to learn from failure as well. And what happened in the end is just as where we are now, it's by no means the end. And I appreciate that I'm cutting big chunks of this out. But 4 of those 6 teams have already presented to the leadership team. The idea was not to just say, we're going to go do this, but if they needed resources, they would come. But those 4 projects already live, a lot of them, as you can imagine, the big one thing that this company wanted to work on was communication. And that for people who were in Munich or Frankfurt or Hanover or Dublin, that it felt as the same as sitting with the leadership team in London on that 5th floor, as they said, so that everybody felt included, everybody felt they connected. There was this sense of one team, really. So a lot of the team projects were around communication, bringing people in. How do we really keep this, how do we become this agile, adaptive, living organization and stay connected as we're growing so fast? And of course, being in the pandemic, having to take my design and turn everything upside down and turn it online had advantages and disadvantages. But I know from I've done a reflection survey to everybody, had to fill out forms and write, and it's very clear that one of the biggest powerful things they've enjoyed is just the quality of connectedness and collaboration that now exists in the company, that they would have never had a chance to meet so many people. So it's a much more robust and resilient organization. The foundation have launched 2 projects, which included an app, another one around new joiners, again, this real care. There's been another stage which goes further into developing team coaching skills for leaders, really bringing a consultative approach or an action learning or that kind of approach. And now there's another stage going further, an invitation. There are 4 other programs I've designed, and then other people will be invited to go on the journey that's happened. So it has become part of the fabric. They've achieved their best performance ever as a company. As I said, 50 people have joined in this last year alone, a year and a bit. And there is, the leadership team is just about now, I've just presented them, how do you integrate all those projects and do something, what will just remain, maybe dissolve or die, and what really needs to be integrated into the fabric of how this organization really exists and structures itself to become even more effective and improve organizational effectiveness as well as team effectiveness. And I guess my if I was to leave you with one thing, is that, yes, I have studied a lot of models and the collective leadership assessment, team luminous spark. I mean, many Hogan, I use multiple. But in answering the question, how do you decide which one? I really believe that the inspiration, Rumi's quote here, that if you sit quietly with yourself and you really think about it and just allow yourself to be your most natural, creative, generative self, the answer usually comes from you. Of course, it's always good to reach out to a mentor, a support, somebody. I'm always happy to answer questions people have. But just to trust yourself more, just go with any of them. Just go with whatever is passionate for you once you've done your original due diligence. And that it's a great way of being creative and alive. And that is the end of my story. I have one more slide.
Wow,
It says end. There it is.
Thank you.
The end.
Really beautiful. And I really, really love the way you talk about the tools as a support for what you really want to achieve, not the tools as tools in their own right or for their own purpose. So thank you very much. And it was really exciting to hear about this last project where you really get into the DNA of the company.
Great. Thank you.
I really love to know more about that.
Yeah, there's of course a lot more I could say, and I certainly would say that the point that Stefan made, when I think about when I started, I would become overwhelmed with data and numbers. And I realized that you do need numbers, you need some sort of measurement. Of course, what gets measured gets achieved. And so much of what these teams lack is the space for real conversation, for relationship building. And whether you're looking at the structure or working with the emergent, which is both these two diagnostics help you to do, the real art is to make space for that. The more closely, of course, when you learn anything, you feel you need to hold it very tight. The more loosely you can allow it to be and expand, the better it becomes.
Right.
I would love to hear questions if people have questions, and I would love to see faces. If people want to turn on their faces, it would be so nice to see, rather than just names. I'm really curious, like who's there behind, who's Cecilia and Malena and Anika, and who's there. Yeah. And I'm really also just very conscious that there, I'm sure in this audience, some very, very seasoned practitioners who could add a lot more to that. Yeah. Does anybody have a question about anything? Or a challenge?
I wonder if you would like to address a question that popped up in my head. You've been talking about this and you've been using I all the way. How often do you use with a how often do you work with a co-coach?
That's so good. Yeah, it's wonderful. I do a lot of co-coaching. I started off with the back there with a Teamcoaching International, always co-coaching. Some wonderful colleagues of mine, from Norway. I have a wonderful Anna was a good coach, a client of mine. These days I tend to co-coach with the client very often. So I'm working in a law firm where the head of learning and development, and there's also another woman, they're both doing their PhDs in team coaching, and they invited me in after meeting me on the team diagnostic survey. And so I'm working with them, and the idea is to work across their 5 leadership bodies, but I'm also helping with their leadership development pieces as well, developing the team coaching competencies and things. And then there is I do a lot of work now with the 6 team conditions. I'm part of that community. Exciting things will emerge from there. You'll see, but very much operating more as a team of teams. So the idea that we can dance in and out. And I've had the same colleagues work with me since I started in 2002. So very often, and some of it is some of it is me, but this situation with this one company would be an example where the CEO was quite adamant that he likes to choose a person in different domains, and it seems to work for them. But then I work with the head of HR, and yeah, so it's I never feel like I'm on my own, even though I may be the principal designer and facilitator. Yeah. Mm.
If I were to build on Andy's question to you, Carissa, how, when you are alone, what are the kinds of things that you enable in your coaches that haven't necessarily been trained, although some of them you said are in training now themselves, yet how do you ready them? Because I know in the past you've shared that relationship is so important to you. How do you model that with them?
Yeah. So I love this one, starting with assumption. Be really honest. We already have a relationship, but what assumptions do you make about me? And what assumptions might I make about you? So we start really then going into that, and then designing an alliance, a working partnership. I really want to understand their personal career ambition, as well. So I start with that individual piece, their relationship in the system, their growth edges, if you want, but then working together, becoming really clear of, I'll be honest around my strengths, and what do they think their strengths are, and how do we do this? How do we become a team now? So I'd literally apply like the 6 team conditions framework thinking into becoming a team. So just very simply to do that, and then and allowing for permission around. Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things about feedback is this, the assumption has always been that the person who's giving the feedback is the authority and knows better than the other. And so I right away try and come from this place of equality, and that there is no, it's more like we're just both being curious. Like, so how can we continuously, in a team coaching, a true systemic, systems-inspired leadership way, how can we both stay awake and aware and help us to grow as a team? So just constantly checking in other words, making sure that we're being who we say we are. Are we achieving the results that we want to achieve? And taking risks, being willing to say, how could we be wrong? Or, I got it wrong.
Thanks.
Super. You've really proven to be twinkling today, and I think your presentation has been super interesting. Thank you so much, Carissa.
Pleasure. Yeah, no, it's so nice to see people. I can't wait to actually really be in the same room with people.
Yeah.
London here is still, although we're open up, there's nowhere to really go because nobody's open, not much is open. So yeah, I see I've seen is there any other more questions or anything? Otherwise, I think we're at time. Literally 2 minutes to go if anybody has a last question. If anyone wants to know more about the collective leadership assessment or the leadership circle profile model, if I was to add that, and I had talked to Anders about presenting that as well and how I work with that. What I would say about that model is, again, I go back to this idea that it's a model which requires people to really look deep into themselves, so that there needs to be that hunger to do the inner work of transformation. Otherwise it might be a little bit frustrating because it takes time to make some of those changes. That said, it can be I used it with a global leadership team, there were 4 companies. And as a result of using that model, it was more of a consulting approach. I did work with the 2 CEOs of the 4 with their teams, but they did a massive restructuring again. So I think maybe the theme I'm hearing here is often this type of work supports the client to then reform or restructure or adapt themselves into the shape they need to be for the journey they say they want to go on. And that thing about guiding people through the wilderness is like my passion, So I think, yeah. All right, everyone. I think it's time for you to have a good afternoon and enjoy the sun.
Thank you so much, Carissa. Wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Thank you very
And
much.
for all of you, I'd like to encourage you to go onto our LinkedIn group and make comments and start discussions around what we heard today. I would love to see there if you have opinions on what we did today and ideas for what to bring up as other topics and speakers. So that was the last pitch from me. And once again, thank you very much, Carissa. You really brought huge value to us, and we appreciate your taking the time and giving us all these insights. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.